I've been a small-town cop for 12 years. There's one case that still scares me. Written by Carl B. 1961. So grab your coffee, sit back, and enjoy the show. Being a cop in a small town in Minnesota probably isn't the most exciting career there is, but it's not bad either. It's actually a relatively peaceful and safe line of work compared to being in law enforcement in one of the big cities, New York or LA, for instance, where the action is. There's only around 10,000 people in the town where I live. It's way out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of open farmland, and the only real crime that ever occurs is pretty minor stuff. The occasional rowdy rednecks getting into a fist fight at one of the 3 bars downtown, teenage vandals, petty theft, the odd drunk driver, a case of disorderly conduct here and there, the rare breaking and entering, that sort of thing. The only real serious stuff I've ever had to deal with is a couple cases of domestic violence and assault and battery, but even that's pretty typical, I guess, and it doesn't happen very often. Well, that's not entirely true. There was one case that still haunts me, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Like I was saying, I live in a pretty peaceful little town. Boring, some would even say. The kind of rural, out-of-the-way hick farming community you've probably driven through on the highway yourself on the way to someplace more interesting, without as much as a second thought or a glance back. The kind of place where nothing out of the ordinary ever happens, you've probably thought, and for the most part you'd be right. But there's one case I can't get out of my mind. One case that still makes my blood run cold whenever I think about it. One case I can't explain no matter how much I try to rationalize it to myself. What happened to the old Garrity woman 7 years ago? I'd been a police officer for 5 years when it happened in the early spring of '14. There were only 5 cops on the entire town police force. Me, my partner Jerry, Pete, and Vance, who both worked the night patrol, and the police chief. Plus Karen, an older woman who was a retired librarian and worked part-time as the dispatcher. The police department was located in the town municipal building and consisted of 2 offices, one for the chief and one for the rest of us to share, and 3 jail cells in the rear, and the 3 of them were never all occupied at the same time. It was an overcast, rainy afternoon in late March, early April. Me and Jerry were in our cruiser on a routine patrol around town when Karen's voice came over the radio telling us there was a possible 1082 in progress at the Garrity house on Turner Road. For those of you who aren't in the know, a 1082 is police code for a burglary. We acknowledged, then changed directions, heading for the Garrity home. I wasn't unduly concerned about the call. I already had a pretty good idea who had made it. Eileen Garrity was an elderly widow who lived in a rundown farmhouse on the outskirts of town. She was probably around 65 or 70 years old and had lived alone since her husband had died of a stroke 3 years before. They had 2 adult children, but they both lived out of town and never visited her. Since her husband's death, she had developed something of a reputation for being eccentric, to put it nicely, or crazy, to put it not so nicely. She was a shut-in who rarely left her home and had her groceries delivered once a week. Basically a crazy cat lady, minus the cats. The reason she was considered crazy was because she had become pretty flaky and paranoid since being widowed, and had called the police department on multiple occasions for everything from hearing intruders moving around in her attic to seeing UFOs in her cornfield. There were probably at least a dozen others too. All her calls turned out to be false alarms, of course. The burglars she claimed were hiding in her attic turned out to be a pair of raccoons that had slipped in under the roof, and the UFOs were probably just jets flying overhead from the National Guard base 50 miles west. I also noticed that Mrs. Garrity's pillow and blankets were lying rumpled on the couch in the living room. The surface of the coffee table in front of it was cluttered with half-drunk cups of coffee, open containers of food, a Bible, and a rosary. It looked like she'd been eating and sleeping in the living room for some time. When we went upstairs, sure enough, the bed in Mrs. Garrity's room was bare, and the room itself looked like it had been vacant for quite a while. There was also something in the living room that really alarmed me. Leaning in one corner was an old double-barreled shotgun that had probably belonged to her late husband. Jerry picked it up, broke it open, and found 2 spent shells in the chamber. He took one out, sniffed it, then told me the gun had been fired very recently. We also discovered something else bizarre. All the mirrors in Mrs. Garrity's house had been shattered, and every closet door had been boarded shut. The one in the front hall on the first floor had a huge hole blasted in the center of it, smaller holes pitting the splintered wood around it. You didn't need to be Sherlock Holmes to deduce that Mrs. Garrity had fired her husband's shotgun into that door. But why? What the fuck had happened here? Jerry shot me a perplexed, questioning look. I shrugged, clueless and equally bewildered. Finished with our inspection of the house, we put away our pistols and turned around to go back outside. Mrs. Garrity was standing in the room behind us, staring us at with that unnerving, blank expression. Both of us almost jumped a foot in the air, startled. Neither of us had heard her enter. Jerry regained his composure and flashed her a fake, reassuring smile. "We don't see any sign of him, Mrs. Garrity. He must have slipped out the back. You're safe now." She didn't relax or appear relieved like she had the countless other times we had humored her. Her face seemed to twitch, and some new look dawned in her eyes. It took me a moment to identify it. It was a look of pure, hopeless doom mixed with utter terror. "No," she said in that same odd, listless, flat voice. "I'm not safe. It's still here. It's hiding, that's why you couldn't find it. And after you leave, it'll come back for me." Then she began to quiver. She started to cry with total despair, breaking down into hysterical sobs that racked her whole body. Jerry and me looked at each other, concerned. We went to the old woman and comforted her as best as we could, guiding her over to her couch and sitting her down with us on either side of her, coaxing her gently back to a state of calm. After she had herself back under control, we asked her to explain what had happened. She was quiet for a few moments, gathering her thoughts. Then she began to speak. As we listened to her story, my body temperature seemed to gradually drop and I felt a chill envelop me. Several times I made eye contact with Jerry and his expression was a mirror of my own. Disbelief and fear. "It started about a month ago," she began. "That's when I first heard the scratching at my closet door. A soft, slow, steady scratching that seemed to come from inside her bedroom closet at night. At first she had assumed it was probably a mouse or some other small animal, except the scratching seemed to come from too high up to be the work of a mouse. Whenever she opened the closet door, always after the scratching had ceased, there had been nothing there. Several times she had started to open the closet door as the scratching was in progress to get to the bottom of it once and for all. But each time she had grasped the knob, she had been overwhelmed with a sudden, overwhelming, irrational sense of unease and had been unable to do it. The scratching sounded too deliberate, too gently, too deceptively harmless, as if something was trying to lure her into opening the closet door. To be safe, she had started locking her closet door at night. Over the next several days, the scratching had gotten louder and more intense, as if something was trying to tunnel its way through the wood. One day, she opened her closet door and found claw marks on the other side. Claw marks that were 6 feet off the ground. Claw marks that looked like they had been made by fingernails. The horror had really started for Mrs. Garrity about a week after she had first heard the scratching sounds. One night, she had awoken to a voice softly calling for her, a voice that seemed to be coming from the locked closet door. She was bewildered, even more so because she recognized that voice. It belonged to Bill, her dead husband. Bill's voice had pleaded for her to open the closet door, telling her that God had sent him down to take her up to heaven where they could be together again, and young, like they had used to be forever. At this point, Jerry had looked at me, wide-eyed from the other side of the couch. "Then what happened?" I prodded her gently. "I thought I was dreaming," Mrs. Garrity said. "I thought it had to be a dream. Poor Bill had been gone for 3 years, and since I was having a dream, I didn't see no harm in doing what he was asking me to. I got out of bed and went to the closet. I reached for the lock, but then I stopped. Something didn't seem right. It was Bill's voice and it seemed perfectly normal. But somehow it was wrong too. The way he was talking, it wasn't like how Bill used to talk. It was like a stranger was using Bill's voice, trying to trick me into opening that closet door. That doesn't make much sense, does it? Actually, nothing she was telling us made sense, but we just asked her to continue telling her story. Bill, or whoever or whatever was using his voice, had continued to beg her to unlock the closet. When she had refused, the voice had changed, becoming harsh and belligerent. It had angrily demanded she open the door, and when she had still refused, it had begun to shout at her, using profanity and making obscene threats. Things Bill never would have said to me while he was alive, before beginning to pound violently on the door. The voice had begun to change, no longer sounding like her late husband's. It had become deeper and distorted until it didn't sound human. In terror, she had fled her bedroom and spent the night on the couch downstairs. Eventually, the pounding and the threats had stopped. "Mrs. Garrity," Jerry politely interrupted her at this point. "Why didn't you call us at the police station when this happened?" She was silent for a moment, then a small, bitter smile formed on her lips. "I thought you'd think I was just imagining it," she told us. "I know people in town think I'm a crazy old lady, and I've had you all out here so many times before for things that turned out to be nothing. I thought maybe it was all in my head and I didn't want to bother you about it." Things had escalated pretty quickly from there. The pounding and threats had continued every night. She had been too scared to sleep in her bedroom and had started sleeping on the living room couch. Then one night the pounding had begun, not just on her bedroom closet door, but all the closet doors in the house. All at the same time. Like there were people in all of them trying to get out all at once, she told us. But it was the same voice in every closet, the same horrible voice. In fear, she had nailed all the closet doors shut to keep the thing, whatever it was, from coming out to get her. Then about 2 weeks ago, something even more terrifying had happened. She had been in her bathroom and was washing her hands in the sink when she had looked up into the medicine cabinet mirror. Here she paused. "What did you see?" Jerry asked her. "I saw it," she said in a choked whimper. "I saw its face instead of my own. It was wearing a black robe with a hood, and its face was just a grinning skull. A skull with horns. Its eyes were red, the eyes of the devil himself. I don't mean I saw it standing behind me in the mirror, it was in the mirror itself." I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. It reached out of the mirror. It didn't have hands, it had claws, and tried to grab me. In horror, she had thrown a bottle of lotion at the mirror, shattering the glass, then to be safe had done the same to all the other mirrors in the house. "How could you stay in this house with all of that happening to you?" I asked her. She shrugged sadly. "I don't have anywhere else to go and no one who'll take me in. The nights were awful, but it was always better during the days. At least then I could get some sleep. It always stopped by morning and never happened during the day." She suddenly shuddered. "Until 3 days ago. Then it started happening all the time, day and night. I wasn't safe no matter what time it was. It had all come to a head late this morning. The pounding had gradually gotten more violent and forceful until all the closet doors were rattling in their frames. Mrs. Garrity knew that even with the boards nailed over them, it was only a matter of time until that thing broke through. In desperation, she had begun praying and reading from the Bible, which had only caused the entity in the closet to laugh at her mockingly. Finally, she had gotten out Bill's shotgun and fired it through the closet door. For a minute or so, there wasn't a sound, she told us. I started to think it was finally over. Then, I saw those red eyes burning in the dark, in the hole the shotgun had made. It chuckled and it said one word to me. "What word did it say?" I asked her. "Tonight," she said, and began to tremble. She lowered her head into her hands and began to sob again. Jerry and I were silent for some time, trying to absorb what she had just told us. We looked at each other, deeply troubled by her story. Neither of us actually believed it, of course, but it was obvious the poor woman was deeply disturbed. She was having some kind of nervous breakdown. Maybe her frayed grip on reality had finally snapped, or maybe old age was taking its toll on her mind. One thing was clear, it wasn't safe for her to be alone anymore, especially not here. It was not healthy for her. Hell, for all we knew, maybe her paranoid delusions were the result of some dangerous form of mold that had formed in the house. Jerry and I excused ourselves for a moment, then stepped outside to talk in private. We both agreed she needed help. She needed to be institutionalized. But for now, it was best she stay somewhere else. We went back in and told Mrs. Garrity she was coming with us. She was going to spend the night in a motel room in town. And tomorrow, Jerry added, we were going to find a priest who would come and exorcise the evil spirit that had been bothering her, getting rid of it once and for all. She broke down again, this time crying in relief, and hugged me and my partner, thanking us over and over again. We drove her to a cheap motel in town and checked her in. Her mental state already seemed to have improved in that short amount of time being away from that house. She smiled and told us she couldn't wait to finally get a night of decent sleep without having to worry about that thing banging on the doors. I think mostly she was just glad she wouldn't have to be afraid anymore of the entity she was convinced was lurking in her house. We both smiled at her and said goodbye, getting in the cruiser and driving away. Our smiles faded as soon as we pulled away from the motel. We both drove in grim silence. We both liked old Mrs. Garrity, in spite of all the time she had made herself a nuisance to the police department with her bogus calls and her erratic behavior. We were sorry her mental state had deteriorated to such a point that she could no longer look after herself. We told the chief her story when we got back. He sighed sadly and nodded, agreeing that she had to be committed somewhere. Tomorrow, him and me were going to drive out and personally visit her son and daughter and explain to them what was going on. And if they still refused to do what needed to be done, the chief would see to it himself that Mrs. Garrity got the help she needed. But we never got the chance. The last time we ever saw Mrs. Garrity was when Jerry and I left her at the motel. Around 4 a.m. the next morning, I was awakened by an urgent phone call from the chief, telling me to get over to the motel as soon as possible. He wouldn't say why over the phone, but I already had a hunch it had something to do with Mrs. Garrity. I felt an awful sense of dread as I got dressed. I wondered if maybe she had taken her own life in her motel room after we had left her. When I arrived outside the motel, my fears were confirmed when I saw crime scene tape blocking the door to Mrs. Garrity's room. The chief, along with Jerry and Pete and Vance, were gathered outside, along with a couple cops from the state police and a pair of detectives from the city. The chief greeted me with a grave expression as I approached. He told me Mrs. Garrity was gone. At first I thought he meant she was dead. Then, seeing the solemn look on my face, he clarified himself. She was literally gone. I looked at him confused. I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before, something that caused a ripple of fear in my heart. The chief was scared. He told me he didn't know what to make of it himself. People in the neighboring rooms had heard blood-curdling screams and sounds of violence coming from Mrs. Garrity's room around 2 a.m. Then nothing. They had called the police department. Pete and Vance had been the first to arrive. They had pounded on the door, but there had been no response. They had forced the door open. When they saw what was inside, they had called the chief himself. "What did they find?" I asked him. "Maybe you ought to come see for yourself," he told me, leading to the doorway and under the crime scene tape. He explained to me that they had found no sign of forced entry, and that the door and windows of the motel room had all still been locked from the inside when Pete and Vance showed up. I took a look around, feeling a shiver run through my body. There was fresh blood splattered around the room. On the walls, the floor, bed, even the ceiling. The blood-stained bed sheets had been ripped away from the mattress, as if someone had desperately tried holding on to them as they were pulled out of bed. There were 10 very thin trails of blood on the carpet, leading away from the bed. 10 thin trails of blood that had been made by 10 desperate, terrified fingers clawing for purchase as their owner was dragged away. I followed the bloody finger marks across the floor, away from the bed, to where they ended, at the closet. I looked at them, then I looked at the chief. He looked back at me, his face hard and impassive, but fear gleaming in his eyes. I approached the closet. The door was standing open. I stood there looking in for some time. The closet was empty, completely empty. There wasn't even blood on the floor. They never found Mrs. Garrity. Hey family. A very big thank you to Carl B. 1961 for allowing me to narrate such an awesome tale. Be sure to check out their Reddit profile for more of their awesome works. If you would like to support us and make a donation, I'd be very much appreciative. I do have PayPal and a Buy Me a Coffee account. Be sure to also check out our merch store. There are plenty of items and designs to choose from. If you enjoyed this video, then why not check out the next one? Here, on the right-hand side. You can also follow us. All my socials and all my other links are contained within the Linktree link below. Take care, everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful and peaceful night. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not.